ping, 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 as each copperhead popped off the rock and John fell down through the sky. Now, fortunately for us, this was a negative moment that we had anticipated. So as John fell, I slowly pulled the rope back against my belay plate, and about 300 feet later, caught him. And about 2 hours later, I pulled him back up to the high point. Now, as teammates in a group like this, we have to know when it's our turn to follow and when it's our turn to lead. And now I knew it was my turn, that I was going to have to lead and find that next crack that would take us up toward our goal. And we found it, and had a nice home to go home to that night on the ledge about 2,500 feet off the deck. So Everest came closer and closer, and we had built these skills together, kind of like tools in our tool chest, where we were finally ready for the big expedition, and that's Everest there on the left. So we flew half a world away to Kathmandu, Nepal, and these are the guys that greet you. And as an Iowan, you think you're off having a big Iowan adventure, but look at the guy here on the right wearing a Pioneer hybrid vest. Just a few shots around Kathmandu here, and stop by the old Barnes & Noble bookhouse and mix up with your team here to go up on the final Everest climb. We take one last little flight up into the heart of the Himalayas, and I know you guys are in a service industry, so here's a look at customer service. There they are unloading our plane. The boxes are just getting thrown out of the back of the airplane and breaking open on the airstrip, and all of our equipment is going everywhere. And this here is the local baggage claim area. So we head out there and we hire a few of these red caps, and these carry the equipment up into the base camp of Mount Everest. Now, we walked out several days later out to an elevation here of about 14,000 feet, and we walked out onto the first glacier of the expedition. And in the middle of the glacier, I saw a team of yaks carrying this equipment up. But in the midst of that group, I saw something, I hadn't seen in all my years of climbing. And as I picked up my pace, I got a little closer, and I saw it was a young man, a young American, who was pushing himself across this glacier in a wheelchair. And I found out his name was Riley. He had been a student at the U.S. Military Academy and had lost both of his legs during regular training exercises there. So with all the sincerity that he could muster, he told me how blessed he was to have the use of his arms. His dream was always to see Mount Everest with his own eyes, and after he lost the use of his legs, he just had to get a little bit creative. So Riley and I became great friends and began pushing and pulling and rolling our way here to the base camp of Mount Everest. And Riley and I had been separated here on the final approach, and when I found him, I saw that he had left his wheelchair, and with his arms cut and bruised, he had climbed up onto a rock, where for the first time he had a view of the summit of Mount Everest. And I asked him, Riley, how is it possible that you've done this? And he said, anything is possible if you can just focus. Anything's possible if you can just focus on your summit. Now, in 2003, you heard in the introduction, we had pretty much all the bad luck you can have on an Everest expedition, and it was only with Riley's focus that we would be able to achieve our dream. So we packed up and started heading up the mountain, up through the ice fall. And in order to do this more quickly, we take these aluminum ladders and drop them like a drawbridge across the crevasses. And looking down there and on up across some of the bigger crevasses, some of the bigger ones are so big you have to climb down inside of them. And the silhouette of a climber here from Iowa City, a friend of mine by the name of Chuck Huss. Up into Camp 1, and then looking up from Camp 1 into the Valley of Silence. This is a valley with a 25,000-foot ridge on three sides. As you walk up here, it's an extremely humbling experience. And around the corner, we get into the second camp, where we spend a lot of time trying to fix the route up this face called the Lhotse Face. It's a 7,000-foot vertical wall of ice. And as we head up the Lhotse Face, we carve these tent platforms out. This is over a period of about 6 to 8 weeks that it takes us to build this route up the hill. Now, after we'd established Camp 3, we were going towards a summit attempt on May 10th, and our friends in the Indian expedition said, no, our bones are creaking, we've got some bad weather coming in, and we have to go back to base camp. And they were right. On May 10th, the jet stream winds, instead of lifting up off the summit, They pushed down all the way to Camp 1. We had hurricane-force winds as low as 20,000 feet on the mountain. 70 tents disappeared. Crates of oxygen bottles just vanished. So it was the worst storm in the history of Mount Everest. It went on for about 2 weeks and very, very dangerous. After the storm, we had our one last chance to get to the summit. So we headed back up the hill and got into Camp 1, where we found our tents had been destroyed, but somehow they remained attached to the mountain. Up into Camp 2, our tents there had also been destroyed, but fortunately, we're still attached to the mountain. And finally, in Camp 3, that's what remained of my tent. You can imagine what would have happened to me had I been sleeping in that, or worse, above, as I had planned. So the storm had not gotten any better, though, so we had to do the unthinkable and take a rest day in Camp 3, taking a rest day up there in the death zone. During the day, my climbing partner, Chris, had a pulmonary edema, his lungs filled with his own bodily fluids, and he began to drown to death. At which point, after some time, Chris decided he had to turn around and go back to base camp, and he made it down the next day. So it shows just the adaptation to these very high elevation is sometimes very, very difficult, just physiologically. So I continued on climbing by myself and arrived in Camp 4, and we made another attempt up towards the summit of Mount Everest. That night, we had teamed up with the Indian expedition, and the Indian climbers radioed back about 3 o'clock in the morning, and they said, "Our bones are creaking again, we feel another storm, we have to turn around and evacuate." So we did. And that was the end of Everest climbing. After you climb above Camp 4, physiologically, your body can't do it again. You can't eat up here, your body is eating itself, and if you stay up there, you'll have a certain edema. So we came back down to Camp 4 and everybody went home. The French quit, the Belgian quit, the Americans quit, the Indians sent down all their lead climbers, and the rest of my team, the International Dream Expedition, went home. I couldn't afford to go home. So I went around that afternoon in Camp 4 without oxygen, now my second day without food or water, my tongue swollen up like a balloon from the dehydration. And I began using all the extra ropes I could find and putting those in my pack. And my Sherpa friend Pasang came and met up with me, and he wanted to know what I was doing. And I told him that I was going to lead the mountain. That was about the craziest thing Pasang had ever heard in his life, but it was his kind of crazy. And he thought if I was going to lead the mountain, he was going to come along and watch. So he put the 5 remaining oxygen bottles in his pack, and he handed me the rope. And the deal was I would attach the rope and break the trail through what was oftentimes waist-deep snow, and he would climb up behind with the oxygen. So we climbed together up into the darkness. And as the sun rose the next morning, we realized that we had climbed up by ourselves into yet another Everest storm. It was whiteout conditions, 40-mile-an-hour winds, and for the second time, I was going snowblind. So I collapsed at some point, unable to continue on with the climb, and Pasang climbed up next to me. And as he did that, there was a sudden clearing in the clouds, and he pointed down through the clouds, and with his broken English, he said, "Look how far you come." And I looked back, not down at base camp or back to Iowa, but all the way back to the beginning of this journey, all the way back 7 years earlier when I had identified this dream. And quite suddenly, that summit didn't seem so far away. So we got up and pressed on across this last 300 feet, 300 yards to the summit of Mount Everest. And here is the view I know you guys have been waiting patiently to see, the view from the top of the world. There you have it. We reached the summit in the storm I mentioned, and we didn't have a very nice view up there. But I enjoy the photographs that you all are sharing with me here today. But we did take a few photographs of our own and had a great celebration on the summit. So like every good talk, I guess it ends with a sunset and a beautiful view. And I've enjoyed being with you here today. And I think if you can just stop today, I think you're about ready to hear your next dream identified. But by applying these principles of bringing the long-term goals and using the short-term goals to bring those closer, I'm quite certain that you will all know what it feels like to stand on top of the world. Thank you for having me here today.